Built around a huge natural harbor is an ultra-modern metropolis, Sydney. A city of 4.5 million, squeezed onto the edge of a scorched continent.
We know there are going to be fires, we just don't know where they'll be, when they'll be.
5,000 people move here every month to enjoy the fabulous lifestyle. How can Sydney sustain this amazing growth? To find out, we will strip the city to reveal its secret inner workings and expose the ingenious technology that allowed engineers to build this harbor metropolis. It's March in Sydney, and the wettest autumn in a decade. Down at the harbor, a team of engineers braves the torrential rain.
It is a beautiful place to work if it wasn't for the weather today.
They're working on a $5 million upgrade for one of the docks. And the final piece is this 7-ton anchor.
It's heavy gear and it's dangerous gear, so we take a lot of caution, you know. If a chain starts to run, it could, you know, take someone out. Nearly there, mate, nearly there, a little bit more.
The crew must fix the anchor firmly to the seabed. Very soon, it will have a big job, securing the world's largest ocean liner when she comes to town. It's the Queen Mary 2. She's as long as 3 football fields, 250 feet longer than the Titanic. A tight fit for any port. How will Sydney Harbor cope when this giant of the seas arrives in 4 days' time? Draining the ocean under the harbor bridge reveals a rocky canyon up to 130 feet deep. One of the largest natural harbors in the world. Ideal for big ships. But dangerous obstacles lurk on the seabed.
Sydney Harbour VTS, this is recorder.
This little boat keeps big ships out of trouble in Sydney Harbour.
We're doing some survey works just west of the harbour bridge over.
Using sonar, the crew tries to spot obstacles on the seabed before they can wreck a ship and bring the port to a standstill.
We've had over 70 passenger ships come into Sydney Harbour since January this year. Even if one ship comes into the harbour, we still have to survey all the channel and the berth that it would attend. Obviously, our biggest concern in Sydney is objects. Many objects fall off the back of barges. We really have to keep track of that and ensure that those objects are removed.
Right in the middle of the shipping lane, the sonar picks up a strong signal.
We can see the computer's just showing the location. And on the trace over here, you can see this is the wreck.
Vanessa's 3D scan of the harbour reveals a 200-foot-long ship on the seabed. It's the wreck of the Kurrajong, a freighter that sank in 1910 after colliding with a liner.
It was lucky that it fell in a location that is still quite deep, and it's not any sort of significant impact for shipping.
Even a wreck as big as this doesn't get in the way, because Sydney Harbour is so deep and wide. It's a huge inlet that allows the ocean to extend up to 12 miles inland. The sea alone could not have sculpted such a deep and jagged coastline. So how was it made? 80 million years ago, this area was high above the ocean. Rivers flowed in from the mountains and meandered across a coastal plateau. They eroded the rocks and cut deep into the land. About 15,000 years ago, the sea level rose and the ocean flooded far up into the river valleys. That was the birth of Sydney Harbor. The harbor is a huge asset. Ships as big as the Queen Mary II can sail right into the heart of Sydney. But when she reaches her dock, things will get a little dicey. She will jut so far beyond the moorings that a heavy crosswind could rip her away from the quay. So the harbor engineers had to improvise. They floated an anchor out next to the berth and dropped it near the bow. They hope this will give the mooring line a better angle of attack to keep 150,000 tons of ship under control once she's made her grand entry. At the crack of dawn, it's showtime. The anchor team is standing by for the QM2, a historic event.
First time she's been into this berth, so it is a world first. Pretty exciting for Sydney Ports.
At 4 a.m., the QM2 glides into port. She sailed 15,000 miles to get here. But the final few feet will be the hardest. Greg's team must have their anchor ready as soon as the pilot has inched the ship into the dock.
That's jammed up, but you got another one, Dave?
Down, jib out.
Okay, take the weight, mate.
Once she gets herself positioned alongside in the right parallel to the quay, we've just got to slowly push her alongside so that she touches ever so gently and we can secure her in place.
3/4 of a metre off forward, and we're about 1.5 metres off aft.
It's now the final push alongside, clearing that water. There's not a lot of water underneath her.
The berth is shallow at the back. In some spots, there's less than 2 feet of clearance. Soon, Greg will know if their anchor can take the strain.
We're standing by. Don't put any weight on it till we get the second line shackled in.
Roger, not a problem.
Just pick it up and we'll have a look, see if nothing's tangled. Okay. Now,
6 a.m. Greg's crew increases the tension on the line, pulling the ship towards the quay.
we've got 20 tonne on the line pull on them. Looks good, so it's anchor's holding. They've got 30 tonne up their sleeve if they need it, so all good. Good day at the office. My word. Yeah, pleased that's done. So we'll pack up and go home.
There aren't many ports in the world where such a juggernaut can sail straight into downtown. But here in Sydney, that's no problem at all. Sydney's unique natural harbour holds 130 billion gallons of water and covers an area nearly as large as 10,000 football fields. It literally put the city on the map and attracted people and trade to help it grow even bigger. Today, as Sydney continues to expand, the big challenge for engineers is moving millions of people around the city every day. Sydney is one of the most popular cities in the world. Glorious beaches and a laid-back lifestyle have attracted millions of people. But they're pushing the city's transport network to the limit. An ambitious project is underway to upgrade one of Sydney's biggest traffic arteries, the M2 Hills Motorway.
It was the first motorway in this part of Sydney, and since that time the number of vehicles and commuters using the motorway has increased significantly over that time.
Andrew's team has to widen this road tunnel from 2 to 3 lanes. Fortunately, the sandstone rock under Sydney is perfect for tunneling.
It's not too hard. You can build basements, build tunnels. The sandstone is just perfect. So sandstone is Sydney, and we love cutting through it.
Sandstone is an engineer's dream. It is soft enough to dig tunnels through, but hard enough to support big buildings. Even structures as heavy as the Sydney Opera House. Its skin is made of more than 1 million ceramic tiles. They can seal 2,000 precast concrete sections that form the roof and weigh almost 30,000 tons. Inside, there are 6 performance spaces that can seat up to 5,000 people. This 170,000-ton monster sits firm on a narrow strip of sandstone jutting into the harbor. The perfect platform for this icon of Sydney. The secret of the rock's origin lies 4 miles from the Opera House, on Australia's most iconic stretch of sand, Bondi Beach. This beach holds important clues to what formed the fabulous rock under Sydney. And geologist Brad Pillins knows just where to look.
It's only really in exposures like this that you can really understand the history of the rocks. This is probably the best place to see the rocks that the Opera House and the Central City is built on.
The sandstone on these cliffs has disintegrated into tiny grains of quartz.
When you scrape off the sand from the outcrop, you can actually see individual grains. And the sand is very similar to what's on Bondi Beach today. So when I look at sand like this, I think, well, where did it come from?
"220 million years ago, there was a huge river delta where Sydney is today. The rivers carried vast amounts of quartz sand, scoured from mountains up to 1,200 miles away. The sand built up at the mouth of the rivers, layer by layer. As the sediments grew thicker and heavier, they compressed the loose quartz grains into solid rock. When the rivers dried up, they left a vast plateau of sandstone, up to 650 feet thick. It's the perfect playground for Sydney's engineers. Tonight, Andrew's team on the M2 face a critical task: to widen a section of their tunnel before morning rush hour.
This is the key to this project, that in little over 2 or 3 hours' time, we're going to have 2,000 or 3,000 vehicles per hour, right where we're standing and walking now.
Explosives would be the quickest way to blast away the rock, but it's not an option so close to city buildings.
Drill and blast is the way that tunnels used to be done in Sydney, but it's very difficult to contain the energy, to control the dimensions, and it's just not suitable for our environment.
Finding the right tool to shift hundreds of tons of sandstone in a few hours is not easy. Traditional diggers would take too long to chip away at the rock face. So the builders wheel in a beast of a machine, a road header. The tungsten carbide tipped teeth on its cutter head are almost as hard as diamonds. Spinning at 60 RPM, they rip away huge chunks of rock. The road header can quickly change its angle of attack to carve out a huge underground cavern. With this machine, the team can finish the tunnel in just 68 nights and keep the road open for traffic during the day.
It's perfectly matched to what we've got. It's very manoeuvrable. We run two simultaneously. It's the best.
Andrew's team is on track to carve out more than 25,000 tons of sandstone to complete this tunnel. It will make the transport network hidden under Sydney even bigger. Peeling back the cityscape reveals a huge maze of tunnels winding their way beneath the skyscrapers. Among them is the widest road tunnel in the world and one of the few underground spaghetti junctions on the planet. Sandstone offers engineers in Sydney another dimension to build a city under the city. And deep below the sandstone lies the treasure that fuels Sydney's growth. Digging it out of the ground is another Herculean feat. Every day, thousands of tons of explosives go off around Sydney. That's what it takes to reach one of Australia's most lucrative natural assets, coal. It's trapped under tough rock. Exploiting it is a big challenge for engineers.
Better get into four-wheel drive here. We're starting to head down into our west pit now.
Explosives expert Tony Lang has mined coal for over 30 years.
On the surface, it can be 40 metres to the first coal, and then we go down another 35 metres to our next lot of coal.
Today, he's gearing up for a big blast. In a few hours, this area will be blown sky high.
This would be probably one of the last spots I'd really want to be when it actually was all initiated. Now, the shock waves coming through the ground actually liquefies all your inside of your body.
It's a dangerous job, but the coal is worth it. Coal has fueled the growth of Sydney for almost 200 years. And there's an amazing relic hidden right under the feet of the city. Half a mile below the harbor, buried under billions of tons of sandstone, run thick seams of coal. Carved into them is a huge coal mine stretching half a mile across. It is the deepest mine in Australia, with plenty of coal left. How did so much coal end up under Sydney? Clues lie 35 miles south of the city, on Wollongong Beach. Here, the sea has eroded the rocks into steep cliffs and revealed a layer of coal.
So just over here is exactly what we're looking for. One of the best exposures of coal in the cliffs on this part of the coast. Beautiful coal. I could burn that at home in my fire if I wanted to.
In 1791, a group of escaped convicts discovered coal in cliffs like these. A lucky find that changed Sydney forever.
At the time, they didn't realise that they were sitting right on top of one of the world's greatest coal resources.
Sydney owes its riches to plants that lived 200 million years ago. Where the city stands today, there was a huge wetland full of lush vegetation. The climate was cold and damp, so when plants died, they decomposed very slowly. Their remains accumulated on the wet soil and turned into thick layers of peat. Heavy rocks formed on top, generating intense heat and pressure that turned the peat into coal. Millions of years later, it is still here, buried more than half a mile below Sydney. Mining it from this depth is tricky, So today, engineers look for coal much closer to the surface. The mine Tony Lang works in has a mere 40 feet of rock sitting on top of the coal. Tony's job is to blow the rock into bits small enough to cart away. It doesn't always go to plan. Some rocks end up a little on the big side.
That's bad fragmentation. So when we're talking about fragmentation and productivity, that's one that doesn't improve our productivity.
Breaking the rock evenly takes both brute force and precision. Well over 400,000 tons of material covers the 6-foot thick coal seam. To remove it, Tony drills deep boreholes and fills them with 170 tons of fluid explosives. If he detonated all charges at once, it would send a shock wave into the ground. The blast would pulverize the soft coal and mix it up with the rocks. Instead, Tony detonates the charges one row at a time. That shifts the rock sideways, so each explosion has space to blast into. Less energy goes down into the ground, which protects the precious coal below. The charges in each of the 539 holes must go off in a perfect sequence.
This actually is a detonator which explodes. It sets off the powder in these tubes, and at approximately 2,000 metres a second, it'll send the signal down through these tubes.
Tony checks every detonator cable, then makes a swift retreat. Fragments of rock can fly almost half a mile.
Attention all personnel in the North Pit. Shot to be fired at CR01. Please maintain radio silence and present positions until the all clear is given.
If the detonators don't go off exactly as planned, the whole seam could be ruined.
5. Radio silence is lifted. Maintain present positions. It certainly humped the rock up to where I was expecting it to.
It's a perfect blast.
Across the top, it's nice and uniform, so it's telling me the pattern's gone off very regularly. It's looking exactly what we're after. Good fragmentation, good productivity will be coming out of this shot.
It will take Tony over a week to get down to the coal, even with monster trucks that can haul away 240 tons of rock. The mines around Sydney produce more than 140 million tons of coal every year, worth well over $10 billion. The coal under Sydney Harbour spawned a booming industry. Today, miners exploit the same coal seam for hundreds of miles around the city. At least 20 billion tons of coal are still left in the ground, enough to fuel Sydney's growth for decades to come. Geology has given Sydney immense riches, but it lacks the most precious resource of all: water. In the heart of Sydney's downtown business district, a team of engineers and archaeologists descends into a relic of Sydney's early history.
We're actually 1.5 metres, 2 metres below the streets of Sydney. We're in the central business district, in fact in the banking area. Every now and then you'll hear a thump in the background, and that will be a car going over the manhole.
The team inspects the remains of a tiny creek called the Tank Stream. Today, it's just a trickle. But 200 years ago, it was the reason British settlers picked this spot to found Sydney.
It was an important spot because it also provided water, food and resources to the Aboriginal people before the British got here. Initially, this was supposed to be the site that would feed the colony, and it did quite well until the period of the drought. Coming from England, they had never experienced a water supply that could be here one year and down to a dribble the next.
It seems unlikely, but when it comes to water, Sydney has a big problem. Each citizen needs 80 gallons of water delivered every day. But central Sydney has only one naturally flowing water source. It's the Tank Stream, or what's left of it, buried under the streets of the business district. Sydney gets more rain than Seattle, but has real trouble feeding water to its people. Downtown Sydney has no real rivers at all. They disappeared in a geological accident 200 million years ago, when Sydney would have sat in a vast plain and mighty streams flowed in from the hinterland. But over time, tectonic forces pushed the land behind Sydney upwards and created the Blue Mountains. They blocked the path of the rivers and cut Sydney off almost completely. That's why today, engineers must work extremely hard to supply the city with water. "40 miles from the city, in the Blue Mountains, engineers have built colossal dams to trap water before it can drain away into the ocean. The undisputed champion of them is Warragamba Dam, 3 million tons of concrete that hold back over 500 billion gallons of fresh water.
We're down in Warragamba Dam's valve house, and this is at the base of the dam, and the water that feeds 4.5 million people comes through these 3 large pipes, around about 1,000 megalitres per day. A lot of people take water for granted. They turn a tap on, expect the water to be there. A lot of people really just don't know what goes into getting that drop of water to the tap.
After nearly a decade of severe drought, Sydney has had some of the heaviest rainfall on record, and its dams are overflowing.
We'd love to capture the extra water, but all of our dams, we've got 21 dams in our system, and just about all of them are full. So it's a wonderful situation to be in, but we need this water. We need to store it for the bad times, the drought times, and sure as night follows day, we will get another drought, and we will need all the water that we've captured.
But how can you store more water than even a dam can handle? 10 miles from Warragamba Dam on the outskirts of Sydney, water engineers have drilled into the rocks to find a solution. They're tapping into the aquifer, groundwater running through the cracks and pores of the sandstone. Normally, they extract water from wells like these, but in the future, they plan to send it the other way.
What we're doing with this bore is we're trying to re-inject water underneath the Sydney aquifer, into the sandstone underneath Sydney.
The team looks for a spot where the rock has extra capacity to store fresh water. They drill over 300 feet down to find the perfect conditions. If the cracks in the sandstone are too big, the fresh water could quickly seep away. The team needs to find an area where the cracks are smaller and the water flows more slowly. Then they can pump millions of gallons of water down into the rock under Sydney, hoping it will stay there until the city needs it.
So 30 kPa.
That's your pump. It's controlled through our trailer and monitored, so we know what our flow rates are.
The team drops a hose 200 feet down into the borehole and pumps out some groundwater. Sensors in the sandstone will measure how fast the groundwater flows back into the area. If the speed is right, engineers can pump in extra fresh water for storage.
Storing it in the ground, there's not going to be evaporation, so there may be a little bit of fraying around the edges, but the recovery rate's quite good and probably better than just storing it in a dam.
Clever water engineering keeps the people of Sydney alive. More than 12,000 miles of pipes feed 250 million gallons of water into their homes and offices every day. Water from its dams helps Sydney survive on this incredibly dry continent. And it also protects the city from one of the greatest dangers it faces today: bushfires. As Sydney expanded, it changed dramatically. What was once a seaside town now stretches far into the bushland around it. These suburbs are highly desirable places to live, but there's danger lurking on the doorstep. The city's North Shore is riddled with ravines carved deep into the sandstone. Houses and streets teeter right on the edge of these cracks in the cityscape. The ravines are full of bushes and trees, which in the summer turn into a powder keg. In the right conditions, they can channel fire directly into the heart of the city. Every year, fires cause millions of dollars worth of damage to houses around Sydney. Just 2 miles from Sydney's Opera House, geologist Brad Pillins explores why the landscape here is so dangerous.
Gorges like this present a real problem for the expanding city. The houses are literally built right to the edge to use every available space.
The eucalyptus trees here are specially adapted to fire. It helps them sprout and spread their seeds. They even come with a built-in fire starter.
You can still smell the faint smell of eucalyptus oil in these leaves on the forest floor. Over decades, accumulating litter like this gets to the point where in a dry season it can burn dramatically. In the face of a raging bushfire, eucalyptus trees like this have been known to instantaneously explode in the heat of the fire. The oils reach the point where they vaporise and the fire takes over.
Once the bush burns, the gorges turn into fiery furnaces.
I can imagine on a hot summer's day with temperatures reaching 40 degrees and a hot westerly wind, the fire would be funneled up a valley like this, and there'd really be no chance of saving the nearby houses.
Good morning, Rural Fire Service, Brett speaking.
Faced with hundreds of these hotspots, Sydney has built up an army of more than 8,000 volunteer firefighters. Brett Lachlan has tackled more than 100 bushfires.
So every summer we know there are going to be fires. The biggest thing is we just don't know where they'll be, when they'll be.
So what do you do if you don't know where a fire is going to happen? you start one yourself.
All right, guys, what's the hold up? Let's go! If a fire starts here, on its own terms, it could be really bad. There are homes in the area, there's National Park nearby, whereas if we light the fire ourselves, we can control it and it's on our terms, and that's really important.
This controlled burn is supposed to remove all flammable vegetation, but you never know what a fire is going to do next.
The temperature, the relative humidity and the wind speed are directly linked to our fire behaviour. So if it gets really hot, really low humidity and really windy, there's a risk then that our controlled burn could become an actual fire.
Brett's crews race to keep the fire contained between two control lines, about 600 feet apart.
We're just starting to get a little bit too close to the edges and out of control. Not quite out of control, but we just brought it back under control and we'll start again if we have
to. The wind is changing fast, fanning the flames.
The fire went from being very controllable and very mild to picking up quite rapidly there as that wind increased. Yeah, that's fast. That's a fast-moving grass fire. Look at the flame height. That's the kind of fire you wouldn't put yourself in front of because you can't do anything to stop that. You can feel the radiant heat, like we're 10, 15 metres away, and you can feel that on your face. Firefighting is a hard game sometimes.
The crew finally gets the flames back under control. But it's a reminder of how dangerous fires can be, especially in a place like Sydney.
So on a bad day in summer when you've got 40+ degrees, you've got winds that might be 30 or 40 kilometres an hour, I mean, you can imagine just how much worse a fire can be. And in that gorge country and with houses all around it and things like that, it can become a really big threat very quickly.
Almost 4,000 square miles of highly flammable bush fill the valleys and national parks around Sydney. Every summer, bushfires threaten the city's suburbs. Some have caused $75 million worth of damage in only a month. But the thousands of volunteers of the Rural Fire Service keep these fires under control. Today, Sydney is the most populous city in Australia, and it's bursting at the seams. Creating living space for the booming population is the latest challenge for the city's engineers. Every month, 5,000 people move to Sydney. The city has outgrown even its extremely long coastline, so now it's moving onto man-made land. In this neighborhood, Barangaroo, engineers are building 3 massive new office blocks on land that once was ocean.
50 to 60 years ago, ships would have pulled right into this area to be unloaded. Sydney itself is quite restricted on both sides by the harbour, so it's going to add a substantial amount of urban environment to the city.
Unlike most engineers in Sydney, Gary doesn't have the luxury of building on solid sandstone. The land here is rubble, dumped into the harbour.
You can see this is the sort of material that we've been excavating through. It consists of anything from broken old bits of concrete. There's clay, sandstone blocks. You can see brick fragments in it. The ground conditions, particularly for our technique of excavation, are terrible. Really challenging and difficult ground to dig in.
Gary's biggest problem is keeping the ocean out of his building site.
We're standing on Swiss cheese. There's so many holes through the ground underneath us that the water can travel through it relatively freely compared to natural ground.
If Gary's team simply digs a big pit into the rubble, the walls will cave in. So instead, they carve out a deep trench around the perimeter and fill it with a dense clay slurry to keep the water out. They drop in steel rebar cages and pump in concrete to displace the slurry and form a watertight wall. Only then can they dig out the basement inside.
The retaining wall that we're constructing is essentially making a bathtub around the site. The walls that we're constructing are socketed down to the underlying sandstone in order to stop the ingress of water underneath the toe of the panel or through the panel. This is a 1200 grab that we use to excavate the trenches. Got about 80 tonne of closing power on the jaws.
They must dig more than 40,000 tons of rubble out of the trench. When they reach solid rock, they use enormous chisels to keep going.
He raises the chisel about half a metre, and then drops it, and under its own weight, pulverises the rock, as you can hear there.
The steel cages that reinforce the walls weigh up to 26 tons each.
This cage is 25.5 metres long, so the panel that it'll be installed to is about 26 metres deep in total.
Even though this wall contains over 35,000 tons of concrete, it cannot keep the ocean at bay on its own. Once the team removes the soil in the pit, the huge pressure from the waterlogged ground could push the walls over. So the crew must drill steel anchors into the walls and secure them to the bedrock below with cables. They tie back the walls like the ropes on a tent to create solid footings for the tower on top. That's what it takes to grow Sydney's real estate into the ocean. When the skyscrapers are complete, 23,000 more people will be able to live and work right in the heart of Sydney. Sydney has grown from a tiny colonial settlement into the largest city on the continent, and it's going to get even bigger. It's the ingenious inventions hidden under the skin of this super city that hold up its buildings, feed it with water, protect it from fires, and keep it moving, that made Sydney the gleaming harbour metropolis it is today.